The air was heavy with the weight of silence when Sam Ward first saw her. A figure on the edge of the woods, hunched against the cold, her body nearly hidden in the deep snow. Sam had been alone in his cabin for too long, the silence broken only by the crackle of the fire and the rhythmic sound of his own heart. The isolation had become a way of life for him. Since his wife passed, he lived in the quiet, needing nothing more than the routine of his work and the sparse visits from a tradesman once a month. But today, the peace was shattered. There she was, a girl who couldn't have been older than 16, sprawled in the snow as if she'd been cast aside like so much refuse. Her hair was tangled with the earth, matted with frost, and her skin was pale, a stark contrast against the whiteness of the world around her. Sam wasn't one to rush into things. He had learned long ago that some things were best left untouched, better left alone. But something about her made him stop in his tracks, his feet frozen in place. The instinct to help, to do something, was too strong to ignore. With a grunt, he dropped his rifle and walked toward her, each step a battle against the biting wind. When he reached her, the scent of river water and smoke filled the air. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her chest rising and falling in a desperate rhythm as if the cold itself were pulling her under. She was muttering something in a language he didn't understand, her body curled inward like she was trying to make herself as small as possible. He didn't know who she was, where she came from, or what had brought her to this lonely stretch of land. But he knew one thing, she was alive. And that was enough for now. Sam knelt beside her, his rough hands gentle as he lifted her into his arms, feeling the faint warmth of her body through her torn clothes. She was light, fragile like a bird who had lost its wings. The world was cold, but there was heat still left in her, a faint pulse that gave Sam a glimmer of hope. His heart beat harder, the urgency of the moment forcing him to move faster. He carried her inside, the weight of the moment heavier than anything he had felt in years. The cabin was modest, humble even, but it offered warmth, something the girl desperately needed. The fire crackled in the hearth, sending warmth throughout the room. Sam laid her down near the fire and wrapped her in the only blanket that wasn't soaked in memory. As she stirred faintly, her lips dry and cracked, murmuring in a language he didn't understand but felt deep in his bones, Sam stepped back, watching her with a strange sense of protectiveness he couldn't quite explain. He didn't speak. She didn't either. The silence was a companion in the room, but one that didn't feel uncomfortable, more like a pause, a deep breath before something important could unfold. Sam knew that silence. It had been his companion for years, ever since Marjorie passed. It had become the language of his grief, but here, in this cabin, with this strange girl, it felt different. It felt like the space between two lives, two broken souls, connected by more than just the physical presence in the room. He worked quickly, gathering water, tending the fire, and setting food on the small wooden table. As he busied himself with the tasks of the evening, his eyes kept drifting back to her. The girl had curled up on the bed near the hearth, her face shadowed by the flickering light of the fire. There was an unsettling stillness about her, like a storm held in check, waiting to break free. She was not yet at peace, but she was safe for now. Sam didn't ask her questions. He knew better than to pry into the private pain of others. He had his own grief to carry, and he carried it in silence. But there was something about her eyes, dark and wary, that made him wonder what stories she carried, what history she had that led her to this moment, lying in his cabin, in his care. When she woke, it was to the scent of something warm, bread, perhaps, or stew. Sam sat across from her, sipping his coffee, his eyes not meeting hers but not ignoring her either. Her gaze wandered over him, scanning, calculating. She was trying to understand him, just as he was trying to understand her. Their unspoken truce remained intact, a fragile thread between them. "You're safe here," Sam said, his voice hoarse from disuse. The words sounded foreign coming from him, but they were true. She didn't respond, but she didn't recoil either. She simply nodded once, her eyes narrowing as she processed what he had said. The rest of the evening passed quietly. Sam tended to his chores while she rested, her breath steadying as her body slowly healed. The storm outside had picked up, the wind howling like something alive. But inside the cabin, there was a calm, an unspoken understanding that they were both surviving this moment. Sam had lived a life of quiet survival for years, and now, somehow, this girl, this broken girl, had entered his world. The storm outside might rage, but inside, there was a tentative peace. Sam Ward's life had been silent for years. The ranch was a sprawling land of solitude, a place where time moved slowly and quietly, like the wind brushing against the tall grasses. Since the death of his wife, Marjorie, he had let himself become a part of the earth, a figure molded by the harsh conditions of his life. His movements were deliberate, each action rooted in the repetition of solitude. The cabin, small and weather-beaten, had become his home and his prison, a place where grief festered and time seemed to lose its meaning. His mornings were simple, checking the fences, feeding the livestock, tending to the small patch of land he still tried to cultivate, though he'd long since abandoned the hope of growing anything other than a few stubborn weeds. His evenings were marked by the flicker of the firelight, the quiet crackle of burning wood, and the distant howls of coyotes that would sometimes disturb the stillness of the night. But even their cries were hollow and faded in the vast, empty space around him. In the early years after Marjorie's death, Sam had tried to fill the void she left behind. He had tried to talk to the townspeople, to take part in the occasional market day, but he found it difficult. Their chatter, their trivial concerns, felt like an intrusion on his grief. So, he retreated. His isolation became his shield, his way of protecting himself from the world that moved on without him. The ranch had once been a place of laughter, of shared moments over meals and long walks through the fields. Sam could still remember how Marjorie's laughter would echo across the land, how her presence filled every corner of the house with warmth. But now, there was only the emptiness of the place they had built together. The cabin had become a tomb of memories, each corner steeped in the scent of old wood and worn leather. For 3 years, Sam had lived in this silence. He was not a man who feared loneliness, for he had long made peace with it. But there were nights when he would sit by the fire, staring into the dancing flames, and wonder if he had become too much a part of the land, too far removed from the world. He'd heard whispers from those who still visited, whispers that Sam had gone mad with grief, that the silence had driven him to the edge. But he knew better. The silence wasn't the cause of his madness. It was simply the only way he could bear the weight of loss. The loss of Marjorie, and the loss of the life they had planned to share. Now, there was a new presence in his cabin. A presence that disrupted the stillness. The girl. Her name, though unspoken, felt like a whisper against his heart. She had not asked for anything, nor had she offered anything in return. She simply existed in his world, like a shadow that had no shape but was somehow impossible to ignore. Sam had always been a man of few words, but now, with the girl in his care, he found himself speaking more than he ever had in years. His voice, rough and unused, seemed to carry a weight that he wasn't sure he could bear. And yet, every time he spoke to her, every time he told her she was safe, a part of him began to heal. Perhaps, in the silence they shared, in the simple acts of caring for her, he was beginning to find his way back from the darkness. His life, once so simple, had been turned upside down by her arrival. But Sam didn't know yet that this would be the turning point for him. The day would come when he would have to face more than just the quiet life he had created. He would have to face his past, his grief, and the choices he had made to survive. But for now, he was content with the quiet moments they shared. The girl, though broken in her own way, was a part of his world now. And for the first time in a long while, Sam felt something stir within him, a flicker of hope, of connection. The days that followed were marked by a strange quietness. The girl, who Sam had come to think of as simply the girl, since she hadn't told him her name, remained largely silent. She didn't ask for much, though her eyes betrayed a deep curiosity about her new surroundings. She seemed to be processing everything around her slowly, cautiously, as if afraid that one false move might shatter the fragile peace Sam had given her. Sam, in turn, kept to his usual routine. He tended the livestock, checked the fences, and prepared the land for the coming spring, though he had little hope for any real harvest. His mind, though, wandered more frequently than it had in years. Thoughts of the girl crept in during his work, and he found himself wondering where she had come from, why she had been left to wander alone in the snow, and what had broken her spirit so completely that she couldn't even speak. One morning, as he worked in the barn, Sam heard a soft sound coming from the cabin, footsteps. At first, he thought it was the wind, but when he looked up, the girl was standing in the doorway. She was watching him, her eyes intent, as though she were trying to understand him as much as he was trying to understand her. Sam wiped his hands on his pants and gave a small nod, gesturing for her to come inside. The wind was fierce outside, biting at everything in its path, but in here, it was warm, the fire in the hearth crackling away as it had since the girl had arrived. She hesitated, her gaze shifting between Sam and the warmth of the fire, and then, as if making up her mind, she crossed the threshold and stepped inside. Her movements were measured, as though she was unsure of her place in the world, uncertain if she truly belonged here. Sam, who had been alone for so long, had no idea how to bridge the gap between them, but he found himself wanting to try. He took a step toward her, then stopped, not wanting to overwhelm her. "Are you hungry?" Sam asked quietly, his voice rough from disuse. She didn't respond immediately, but after a long moment, she nodded, her eyes never leaving him. Sam's heart skipped in his chest, unsure if this was a step forward or simply another silence between them. But it was something, and in that something, he found a flicker of hope. He went to the stove, the familiar motions of cooking offering him a sense of normalcy. The smell of bread and stew filled the small cabin, and for a moment, the world outside seemed a little less cold, a little less lonely. He set a bowl of soup down in front of her, and she looked at it, then back at him. Sam noticed the faint tremble in her hands as she picked up the spoon. He didn't know how to offer comfort, but he hoped that this simple act, this quiet offering of food, would help. As she ate, Sam sat across from her, watching the fire dance. The silence between them was still thick, but it was no longer oppressive. The girl wasn't running from him. She wasn't hiding. She was simply existing in this space with him, sharing this quiet moment. Finally, after what seemed like hours, she spoke, her voice soft and cracked, like a bird learning to sing after years of silence. "Thank you," she said, her eyes meeting his for the first time. I don't remember how I got here." Sam didn't know what to say. He simply nodded, not pressing her to share more than she was willing. She wasn't ready, and he respected that. But her words, fragile, broken as they were, felt like a bridge, a small connection between their two isolated worlds. "You're safe here," Sam said again, as he had so many times before. It wasn't a promise, not really, but it was all he could offer. She didn't say anything more, but the faintest flicker of relief passed over her face. It was as if the weight she had been carrying was, for a moment, a little lighter. For the first time since her arrival, Sam allowed himself to exhale. She wasn't gone. She wasn't running. There was something here, in the quiet of the cabin, in the warmth of the fire, that offered both of them something they had been missing for so long. Peace. A chance to heal. Later that evening, as the night settled over the cabin, Sam sat by the fire, his eyes tracking the flickering shadows on the walls. The girl had gone to sleep in the small bed by the hearth, the warmth of the fire keeping the chill at bay. She was finally resting, her body beginning to heal, though Sam knew that the true scars ran deeper than any physical injury. Outside, the wind howled louder, but inside, it was still. Sam felt a strange sense of gratitude, as though something had shifted, if only for a moment. The girl's arrival had brought a storm with it, yes. But now, as he sat alone in the silence of his cabin, he could hear the quiet hum of life returning. Maybe it was the fire. Maybe it was the girl. Or maybe, just maybe, it was hope. The days stretched on, each one marked by a subtle shift in the air, a slow thaw between the two of them. Sam noticed the small changes first. The girl began to sit closer to the fire, her shoulders less hunched, her eyes no longer clouded with the distant wariness they had once carried. She had started to help, without being asked, in ways that surprised Sam. She tended to the animals in the yard, brushing down the horses with quiet care. Her movements were measured but confident, as if she had always done this, as if she had always been a part of this place, though Sam knew that couldn't be true. One morning, he found her by the stable, sitting in the sun, her back against the barn as she worked on a piece of leather. She was making something, a pouch, perhaps, or a strap, and though Sam didn't know what it was, he recognized the quiet determination in her hands. It was the same kind of determination that had seen him through long, hard years. It was the kind of resolve that came from survival, from knowing that you could only depend on yourself in a world that often seemed indifferent. He watched her for a long moment, wondering what thoughts were hidden behind those dark eyes of hers. What was she thinking as she worked the leather, her hands moving with practiced precision? Was she thinking of the life she had left behind? Was she thinking of home, or was she trying to make a new home here, in this strange, quiet place? "How's it coming?" Sam asked, his voice gentle, but it startled her. She looked up quickly, her expression guarded, but not unfriendly. "It's coming," she said softly, her voice still rough from disuse. It had a quiet strength to it now, a calmness that hadn't been there when she first arrived. The weight of her past still hung over her, but Sam could see the subtle changes in her, the way she carried herself, the way she spoke, the way she was beginning to make this place her own. It was slow, but it was happening. Sam walked over to her, crouching down beside her. He wasn't sure what to say, what to do, but he knew that this small act, asking her how she was, showing an interest in what she was doing, was important. It was a connection, a bridge between them that didn't need to be forced. "You've got a good hand for it," he said, nodding toward the piece of leather in her hands. She glanced at it, then back at him, her lips twitching into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "It's not much," she replied. "Just something to pass the time." "Sometimes, that's all you need," Sam said, his voice low, thoughtful. He wasn't sure if she understood the weight of his words, but they felt true, like a piece of wisdom earned over the years of solitude. Sometimes, passing the time was all you could do. Sometimes, it was the only thing that kept you moving forward. For the rest of the morning, they worked in silence, each of them absorbed in their tasks. Sam checked the fences, repaired a broken gate, and split wood for the fire. The girl continued to work on the leather, occasionally glancing up to watch him, but always returning to her task with focused determination. It wasn't much, just small, quiet acts, but they were acts of healing, of making this place feel less like a tomb and more like a home. That evening, as the sun began to set and the world outside was painted in hues of gold and orange, Sam found himself sitting by the fire, the girl across from him. She had stopped being a stranger, though the past still lingered between them. There were no words for the bond they were beginning to form. It wasn't a friendship, not yet. It wasn't love. But it was something. Something real. The cabin felt warmer now, not just from the fire, but from the quiet presence of another soul. Sam hadn't realized how much he had missed the company of another person, how much he had missed the subtle companionship that came from shared silence. The girl looked at him for a long moment, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. There was a flicker of something in them, something more than just survival. Maybe it was trust. Maybe it was a willingness to let go of the past, at least for a moment, and move forward. "I never got your name," Sam said quietly, breaking the silence. It wasn't an intrusive question, not the way it might have been before. It was simply a question, a small thing, but one that mattered. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the leather in her hands, then slowly, as if testing the words in her mouth, she spoke. "Nahili." Sam nodded, repeating the name in his head. Nahili. It was soft, like the wind through the grass, yet strong, like the roots that held the earth together. For some reason, it felt like a name he could remember. A name that would stay with him, no matter how much time passed. "Nice to meet you, Nahili," he said, his voice low but sincere. She didn't respond, but there was something in her expression, a softness that hadn't been there before. A glimmer of recognition, of understanding. And for the first time in a long time, Sam felt the weight of the silence between them shift. It wasn't just the absence of sound anymore. It was the quiet of two people who had, in some small way, begun to heal together. Though the fire crackled on long after Nahili and Sam had retreated into their separate spaces for the night, the weight of the past hung in the corners of the room like a shadow they could not escape. For Nahili, that shadow was formed by memories too painful to bear, memories of the life she had left behind, of a world she had been forced to flee. For Sam, it was the ever-present ache of a love lost and a past he could never change. They slept in silence, but even in sleep, the past was never far from them. Nahili, with her restless dreams, and Sam, with his quiet nights, both carried burdens that could not easily be laid down. They were not the first to face the cruelty of the world, but the burden of survival, of being forced to endure pain and hardship without the luxury of choice, was something they shared now, silently, with one another. The following days brought subtle changes. Nahili's healing was slow, but steady. Her body, once frail and weak, began to regain its strength. Her face, once gaunt and hollow, now carried a spark of life, though her eyes still held the distant pain of someone who had seen too much. Sam saw it when she worked the land beside him, when she tended the animals with care and precision, when she would pause, just for a moment, to look into the distance, lost in a thought too heavy to share. Sam, too, felt a shift in the air. It wasn't the same as before. There was a sense of something new, an awareness that perhaps, in some quiet, unspoken way, he was no longer alone. He didn't know what it meant, or if it would last, but he could feel the change in the rhythm of their days. It wasn't companionship, not yet, but it was a shared purpose. Sam's thoughts no longer revolved entirely around survival. Now, they danced with the possibility of something else, a future, perhaps, or at the very least, a reason to wake up every morning. That afternoon, as Sam worked in the field, he heard her footsteps approach, the familiar sound of boots crunching against the earth. He turned, wiping sweat from his brow, and saw Nahili standing just a few paces away. She held something in her hands, a bundle of dried herbs tied with a piece of leather. "I thought these might help with your back," she said quietly, her voice soft but steady. Sam looked at the bundle, then at her. "You didn't have to do that," he replied, his tone filled with something like gratitude and surprise. Nahili simply nodded, offering the bundle to him. "We take care of each other, don't we?" The words were simple, but they carried weight. Sam took the herbs, his fingers brushing hers, the contact brief but not unwelcome. He didn't know what to say, but he could feel something stirring inside him, something that made him want to hold on to this moment longer, to say something more. "Thank you, Nahili," Sam said, his voice rough with the unspoken emotion that lingered between them. "You've been a help. More than you know." Nahili nodded again, a slight, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I think we both know we've been helping each other," she replied. Her words were simple, but the meaning was clear. They were in this together, whether they liked it or not. Their lives had collided in this small cabin, in this small piece of earth, and whether fate had brought them together by design or by accident, they were now bound by something deeper than just survival. Sam didn't know what to make of it. He didn't know if it was the start of something new or something that could last. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel so alone in the world. And that, in itself, was enough for now. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and purple, Sam found himself thinking about the girl's words. They had been a simple thing, an everyday comment, but there was a depth to them that he hadn't expected. It was something he hadn't realized he was missing, the connection between two people who shared not just a place, but a purpose. Nahili was more than just a burden he had taken on. She was a companion, whether she realized it or not. And as Sam sat by the fire that night, the weight of the past still heavy on his shoulders, he couldn't help but wonder if, in some small way, they were both beginning to heal. Nahili sat across from him, the firelight casting shadows on her face, but Sam could see the way her eyes lingered on him, the way she was beginning to trust him, perhaps without even realizing it. He wasn't sure where their paths would lead, or how their story would unfold, but for now, in this moment, they were here together. And that was enough. For the first time in a long time, Sam felt the weight on his heart begin to lighten, even if just a little. There was something healing about their shared silence, something that made the pain of the past feel less insurmountable. Together, they were small, but they were strong. And for now, that was enough. The days blurred together, a rhythm formed between the two of them as the seasons slowly shifted. The winds became warmer, the land began to show signs of life once again, and Sam felt the weight of the past easing off his shoulders, though he knew it would never completely leave him. Nahili's presence was like a slow-burning fire, one that had started as a flicker and was now beginning to warm the entire cabin, spreading a lightness that Sam hadn't expected. Each day, Nahili became more confident in her new role, whether it was helping Sam with his chores or quietly sitting by the fire, lost in thought. Her silence was no longer oppressive, it was a peace, a mutual understanding between them that needed no words. The cabin felt fuller with her there. There was a warmth in the room that Sam hadn't realized he had been missing. It was as if the house, which had once seemed like a mausoleum of grief, was now a place of living, of quiet joy. Sam had learned, over the past few weeks, that Nahili had a quiet strength about her, something raw and real. She didn't ask for sympathy. She didn't look for pity. She simply lived, and in doing so, she showed Sam that survival was not just about enduring. It was about living in the quiet moments, in the unspoken bonds that formed when two people chose to survive together, not apart. One afternoon, as they worked side by side, Sam noticed something new in her, something that hadn't been there before. Nahili was no longer the fragile, broken girl he had first found in the snow. She was standing taller, her movements less cautious. It wasn't just physical strength that was growing in her, it was emotional resilience. She had stopped looking at the ground when she walked. She no longer flinched when he spoke. "You're doing good," Sam said, as he stood at the fence, watching her finish tying a section of the livestock pen. His voice was gruff, as always, but there was a tenderness beneath it, a recognition of how far she had come. Nahili didn't look up immediately, but when she did, her eyes met his with a clarity he hadn't seen before. "I know," she replied simply. The words weren't boastful, nor were they spoken with arrogance. They were simply the acknowledgement of someone who had learned to trust in themselves again. Sam nodded, feeling a quiet pride in her progress. It wasn't just about the work they did, the land they tended, or the animals they cared for. It was about the way Nahili was reclaiming her life, piece by piece, as they both navigated this new, unspoken relationship. It wasn't easy, nothing about survival ever was, but together, they were making it work. That evening, after a long day's work, Sam sat by the fire with Nahili. The cabin was cozy, the warmth from the hearth seeping into the floorboards, and for the first time, Sam didn't feel the weight of the years pressing on him. The loss of Marjorie, the grief he had carried with him for so long, was still there, but it didn't feel so suffocating now. In the quiet, in the shared space between them, he felt something else, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope. He glanced at Nahili, who was sitting across from him, the firelight casting soft shadows on her face. She had her hands folded in her lap, her eyes reflecting the glow of the flames, lost in thought. Sam could feel her presence beside him like an unspoken promise, a promise that, no matter how difficult the world was, they would face it together. "I never thought this place would feel like home again," Sam said, breaking the silence. His voice was softer than usual, and Nahili looked up at him, her gaze steady. "Maybe home isn't about the place," she said, her voice quiet but sure. "Maybe it's about who you're with." Sam looked at her, his throat tightening. There was something in her words, something that struck at the very core of his being. Maybe she was right. Maybe home wasn't just the land, the cabin, or the things they had lost. Maybe it was the people you chose to survive with, the bonds you forged in the quiet, in the struggle. And in this cabin, in this broken, humble place, Sam was beginning to understand that he was not just surviving. He was living. The fire crackled softly as they sat in the comfortable silence, the weight of the past slipping away, replaced by a quiet, steady understanding. Sam couldn't say what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel as though he was facing it alone. Nahili had become a part of his life in a way that he couldn't quite explain. She wasn't just a survivor. She was his companion, his equal. And that, Sam realized, was more than enough. They were both broken, in their own ways. But together, they had started to heal. The wind howled outside, a constant reminder of the harsh world that lay beyond the safety of the cabin walls. Sam stood at the window, his gaze focused on the darkening sky. He had seen storms like this before, heavy, unpredictable, and violent. But this one felt different, as if the land itself was bracing for something more than just a change in weather. It was as though the earth, the wind, and the sky were all conspiring to remind him of the fragility of the world he had built here. Inside, Nahili was preparing a simple meal, her movement steady, her face a study in concentration. Sam watched her for a moment, his thoughts swirling like the storm outside. She had come to him a broken girl, fragile and lost, but now, she was a woman who had learned to survive. She had found strength in the quiet moments, in the small victories they had shared. And though the storm outside raged, Sam couldn't help but feel that they, too, had become something stronger together. The door creaked open, and Sam turned to see Nahili standing in the doorway, a basket of vegetables in her hands. She looked at him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face as though trying to understand the tension that had settled in his features. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice soft, but laced with concern. Sam didn't immediately answer. Instead, he walked to the door and opened it wider, stepping out onto the porch. The wind bit at his face, but he welcomed the cold. It felt like a reminder that he was still alive, still capable of feeling something, anything. Nahili joined him a moment later, standing silently beside him as they both looked out at the storm rolling in. "I've seen storms like this before," Sam said after a long pause. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it that Nahili hadn't heard before. "They can be dangerous. They tear everything down, leave nothing but rubble in their wake." Nahili didn't respond immediately. She knew what Sam meant. The storms in their lives had always been like that, violent, unpredictable, and relentless. But she had learned to endure them, just as Sam had. They had both been through their own personal storms, and though they were different, the pain had been the same. "We'll be fine," she said softly, her voice steady as she spoke the words that had become a comfort to both of them. "We've weathered worse." Sam looked at her, his eyes meeting hers for a moment. He wanted to say something, to explain the fear that had taken root in his chest, but the words wouldn't come. The storm outside wasn't just the wind. It wasn't just the danger that lay beyond the cabin walls. It was the storm that had been building inside of him for years, a storm of grief, of fear, of unspoken things. And Nahili had become both the calm in the center of that storm and the storm itself. He reached out and touched her arm, his hand lingering there for a moment, grounding himself in the presence of another human being. She turned to him, her expression unreadable, but there was a warmth in her gaze that made Sam feel as though, for the first time, he wasn't facing the storm alone. "We'll be fine," Sam said, echoing her words, though this time, they didn't feel like an empty promise. They felt like a vow, one that he hadn't realized he had made until that very moment. As they stood together, watching the storm approach, Sam realized that the real battle was not the one they would face in the coming hours with the storm. The true challenge had already begun, the challenge of learning to live again, to hope again, to love again. And with Nahili by his side, he felt that perhaps, for the first time in years, he could face whatever came next. The storm arrived with a roar. The wind howled, the trees bent, and the earth trembled under the force of it. Sam and Nahili worked together to secure the cabin, to brace for the worst. They moved in sync, the quiet rhythm of their work a testament to how far they had come together. When the worst of the storm had passed, they stood on the porch once more, watching the aftermath. The wind had died down, but the land was still, the air thick with the smell of rain and earth. Sam took a deep breath, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease just a little. "That was something," Nahili said, her voice quiet but filled with something Sam couldn't quite place. There was a lightness in her now, a sense of relief. "Yeah," Sam agreed, his voice hoarse. He didn't know if it was the storm or the events of the past few weeks that had brought him to this place of peace, but in this moment, standing next to Nahili, with the storm behind them and the promise of a new day ahead, he felt something shift in him. Something deep and lasting. He didn't know where the future would take them, or how long they had before life threw another storm their way, but for now, he was content. The storm had passed, and so had the fear that had plagued him for so long. He looked at Nahili, who stood beside him, not as a stranger, but as someone who had become an essential part of his life, his survival. Together, they had weathered the storm. Together, they would face whatever came next. The storm had passed, but a different kind of tension lingered in the air. Sam could feel it deep in his bones, a subtle shift that told him something was coming. He had lived long enough to know that peace, though welcome, was often fleeting. The land around them had settled, the silence returning after the storm's fury. But there was a sense of unease that Sam couldn't shake, a feeling that the quiet was just the calm before the next tempest. A few days after the storm, Sam was tending to the horses when he noticed something strange, a disturbance in the earth, faint but unmistakable. Hoof prints. Fresh ones, too many to ignore. Sam's heart skipped a beat as he stepped closer, the hairs on the back of his neck prickling. He knew those tracks. He had hoped he was wrong. He had hoped that the past, like the storm, would pass and leave them untouched. But he knew better. This land, like his life, had been scarred by things he couldn't forget. And now, it seemed, the past had come back to find him. He didn't waste any time. He walked quickly back to the cabin, his mind racing. Nahili was inside, preparing their evening meal, her movements calm and measured. She didn't look up when Sam entered, but he knew she could feel the change in the air. There was something about the way she paused, as though waiting for him to speak. "It's them," Sam said quietly. His voice was rough, but steady. "It's your father. He's come for you." Nahili froze, the knife in her hand stilling in midair. Her expression, always calm, now showed the faintest crack of emotion, something Sam had never seen before. The girl who had once been a stranger, broken and lost, was now someone else, someone strong. But in that moment, Sam saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. It wasn't for herself, he realized. It was for him. "I'm not ready for this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words were sharp, a truth Sam hadn't expected to hear. Nahili wasn't just a survivor. She was a daughter, and no matter how far she had come, there were parts of her past that would always remain. "You don't have to be ready," Sam said, stepping closer to her, his voice soft but firm. "You're here. You're safe." But Nahili shook her head, her eyes darkening as she looked at him. "You don't understand. My father, he won't leave until he takes me back. He'll do whatever it takes." Sam felt the weight of her words sink in. He hadn't known the depth of her past, not truly. She had never spoken of her family, her life before the storm, and Sam had never pressed her to. But now, standing in front of him, he understood. Her father wasn't just a figure from her past. He was a threat, a force that could tear apart everything Sam had worked so hard to build. "There has to be a way," Sam said, his mind racing. "We can leave. We can go somewhere else. It doesn't have to end like this." Nahili looked at him then, her gaze steady, but filled with a sadness that made Sam's heart ache. "I can't run anymore, Sam. I've been running my whole life. It's time to face it." The silence between them stretched on, thick with unspoken truths. Sam knew that he couldn't keep her from the past forever. He had never been a man to run from confrontation, and he wouldn't start now. He was not going to lose her, not without a fight. "They'll come soon," Nahili said softly. "When they do, I'll go with them. I won't let them hurt you." Sam stepped forward, taking her hands in his. "You don't have to do this alone. We'll face it together, Nahili. Whatever happens, we face it together." For a moment, she didn't answer. But Sam could see the struggle in her eyes, the battle between the past she had left behind and the future she was beginning to build here. He didn't know how this would play out, but he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't let her face it alone. And then, without warning, she pulled him into a brief, fierce embrace. Her body was still tense, but Sam felt the release, the quiet acknowledgement that, in this moment, they were together. He wasn't sure if that would be enough to hold off her father's return, but he was willing to fight for it. They spent the rest of the day preparing, gathering supplies, reinforcing the cabin, and getting ready for whatever came next. Nahili didn't speak much. She was lost in her thoughts, her mind already in the past, where her father's shadow loomed large. But Sam could see the determination in her eyes. She was no longer the broken girl he had found in the snow. She was someone who had learned to survive, who had learned to fight for herself. As dusk fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, Sam stood on the porch, looking out into the night. The air was still, the world around them peaceful, but Sam knew it wouldn't last. Her father was coming. And when he did, everything would change. Inside, Nahili joined him, standing beside him in the silence. They didn't speak. There was nothing to say. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they had come this far together, and no matter what happened, they would face it as one. The wind shifted, the air heavy with the promise of something more. Sam could feel the weight of what was coming, but he stood firm. Whatever happened next, he would protect her. He would fight for her, just as she had fought for herself. Together, they would face the storm once more. The morning came with an eerie calm. Sam and Nahili had not slept well, though they had tried to find rest in each other's presence. The storm of the previous days had passed, but the one they were now facing was far greater. The air felt thick with tension, and Sam could feel his heart beating faster than usual, his body tense as he prepared for the inevitable. Nahili had hardly spoken since their conversation the previous evening. She had spent most of the night packing a small bundle of belongings, her movements methodical, almost as if she were preparing herself to leave. Sam watched her for a long time, torn between wanting to comfort her and knowing that she had already made her decision. "I'll be ready," she said quietly, her voice steady but distant. She had become a woman of few words, but those words carried weight. She wasn't asking for reassurance, and she wasn't looking for sympathy. Nahili had made her peace with the situation, as much as anyone could. Sam didn't respond at first, his thoughts clouded with uncertainty. The decision was hers, but that didn't mean it was easy. He had come to care for her deeply, in a way that he couldn't quite explain. The idea of losing her, of watching her walk back into the life that had torn her apart, was a thought that cut deeper than he had expected. But he couldn't force her to stay. She had made it clear the night before. She had to face her past, her father, and he could do nothing but support her as she did. They moved together toward the front door, the silence between them heavy but not unkind. Nahili looked at Sam once more, her eyes meeting his with a quiet strength that made his chest tighten. "I'll be all right," she said, her voice soft but resolute. Sam nodded, though he couldn't bring himself to speak. The door creaked open, and together, they stepped out into the harsh sunlight. Sam squinted against the bright glare, his heart pounding as he scanned the horizon. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew one thing: Nahili's father would not be coming alone. The air felt charged, a palpable sense of anticipation hanging in the atmosphere. It didn't take long for the first signs of movement to appear. A distant rumble reached Sam's ears, a soft thunder that grew louder with each passing moment. Nahili stood beside him, her face unreadable, her posture tense but calm. She had accepted what was coming. She had already made her choice. "They're here," Sam said, his voice tight, though he had known it was only a matter of time before they arrived. The first rider appeared on the horizon, a solitary figure cutting through the dusty earth. As the rider came closer, Sam could see that the man was dressed in the traditional garb of the Comanche, his long hair braided, his face set in a grim expression. Behind him, a small group of warriors followed, their horses moving steadily forward, their eyes trained on the cabin. Nahili's father was among them, riding at the head of the group. He was tall, his face marked by years of hardship and wisdom. His gaze was hard, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something deeper, that Sam recognized. It was the look of a man who had lost something precious, someone precious, and was now determined to reclaim what he thought was rightfully his. Sam's heart thudded in his chest as the group approached. Nahili didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. Instead, she stepped forward, her face a mask of calm, but Sam could see the flicker of emotion behind her eyes. She wasn't afraid of her father. She had lived with his shadow for too long to fear him now. But there was something else, something more complicated than just the confrontation they were about to have. Nahili's father dismounted first, his tall figure towering over them as he approached. His eyes locked on Nahili, and for a moment, Sam felt like an outsider, a witness to something that had been brewing for years, long before he had ever stepped foot on this land. "You sheltered her," the father said, his voice low and filled with a quiet authority. Sam met his gaze, standing firm. "I didn't shelter her. I gave her a place to heal. A place to be free." The father's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the tension between them felt like it could snap at any moment. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of history and the power of a father's love, twisted by years of control and domination. Nahili stepped forward, placing herself between her father and Sam. She didn't say anything at first, but her stance was clear. She had made her choice. "I am not a child anymore," Nahili said, her voice steady, though Sam could hear the rawness underneath. "I don't belong to you. I don't belong to anyone." Her father's face softened for the briefest of moments, a fleeting flicker of recognition crossing his features. It was as if he had been forced to accept something that had been true all along but that he had never been able to admit. He had failed her, and now, she was no longer his to control. "I did not come to take you back," he said slowly, his voice carrying an unfamiliar weight. "I came to see if you had found what you needed." Nahili's gaze softened, but she didn't take a step closer to him. "I have found what I need," she said, her voice quieter now. "But I won't go back to the life you want for me. I can't. Not anymore." There was a long silence, and in that moment, Sam felt the air shift. It wasn't a resolution, not exactly, but it was a beginning. Her father didn't speak for a while, as if he were weighing her words, letting them settle deep within him. Finally, he nodded. "I see," he said, his voice softening. "I see that you are not the same girl who left." Nahili didn't answer, but Sam could see the relief in her eyes, a quiet recognition of something that had always been true. She was no longer bound by her past. She had broken free, not just physically, but emotionally, and nothing her father could say or do would change that. With a final glance at his daughter, the father mounted his horse again, signaling for the others to follow. Without another word, the group turned and began to ride away, their forms disappearing into the distance. Sam and Nahili watched them leave, the quiet aftermath settling in around them. Nahili turned to Sam, her eyes filled with something new, peace, perhaps, or simply the quiet realization that she had made it through the storm. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but sincere. Sam nodded, though words were unnecessary. They had both been through the storm, and now, they were standing on the other side of it, together. The day after her father left, there was a quiet stillness that lingered in the cabin. The air felt different, Not just because the danger had passed, but because Nahili had made a decision that Sam knew had taken everything from her. It was more than just standing up to her father, it was about claiming ownership of her life, her future, something she hadn't had the chance to do before. She had confronted the past, and now, for the first time in her life, she was free of its weight. They spent the morning together, working side by side, but there was a different rhythm to their movements. Nahili no longer moved with the caution of someone who feared what was to come. Instead, she worked with a kind of quiet confidence, a silent acknowledgement that she had finally stepped into her own. Sam watched her as she moved through the cabin, her hands steady as she set about their daily tasks. There was a peace in her now, a quiet strength that came from confronting her past and walking away from it. Sam couldn't say he fully understood what it had cost her, but he could see the transformation in her. She wasn't the girl who had come to him in the snow, broken and scared. She was someone else, someone whole. As the day wore on, they worked in companionable silence, the kind that only comes when two people have shared something profound. Neither of them needed to speak. The silence between them was no longer uncomfortable, no longer laden with the weight of unspoken emotions. It was a peaceful kind of silence, the kind that only exists when two people are truly at ease with each other. By late afternoon, the land around them was still, the sun dipping low behind the hills, casting long shadows across the earth. Sam found himself standing at the edge of the property, looking out over the land that he had come to call his own. It was a modest piece of earth, but it had become his refuge, his sanctuary, a place where he could bury his past and try to rebuild what had been lost. He looked to Nahili, who stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the horizon. There was a quiet determination in her eyes, and Sam could see that she was finally at peace with the choice she had made. For a moment, they stood together, side by side, watching the sun fade behind the hills, the world around them turning soft and golden as the day ended. "I never thought this would be my life," Sam said, his voice low and thoughtful. "I never thought I'd be here, with someone like you." Nahili turned to him, her face soft with understanding. "I didn't think I'd be here either," she replied quietly. "But somehow, here we are." Sam nodded, the weight of her words settling in. The past hadn't been kind to either of them, but they had found something here, together. They had both survived, not just the hardships of the land, but the ghosts of their own pasts. And now, in this quiet moment, Sam realized that he had found something he hadn't known he was looking for: peace. The evening stretched on, the stars beginning to appear overhead, their light flickering like distant promises. The world around them was quiet, but there was a feeling in the air that spoke of new beginnings. The past was never truly gone, not for either of them, but it no longer had the same power over them. They had chosen their own path, together. Later that night, as they sat by the fire, the cabin warm and peaceful, Sam felt a sense of contentment that he hadn't felt in years. Nahili sat across from him, her face illuminated by the flickering light, her eyes reflecting something that Sam couldn't quite name, but that made his chest feel lighter. For the first time in a long time, Sam realized that he was no longer just surviving. He was living. He wasn't alone anymore. And with Nahili beside him, they would face whatever came next, not as strangers, not as people running from their pasts, but as two people who had chosen to face the future together. Sam had thought the silence would be his companion forever, but now, the silence felt different. It wasn't the silence of grief. It was the silence of two people who had found their way home, together. "I'm glad you stayed," Sam said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of everything he hadn't been able to say before. "I don't think I could have done this alone." Nahili looked at him, her expression soft, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "You're not alone anymore, Sam. Not anymore." And as the fire burned low, casting long shadows across the cabin, Sam knew that this was only the beginning. The storm had passed, but the quiet strength between them was something that would carry them through whatever came next. Together, they had made it this far. Together, they would continue.